The moment my little niece stepped into the house, my German shepherds reacted differently. They stayed close to her, ears constantly pricked, occasionally growling at nothing. At first, I found it amusing, assuming they were just being protective, but then I noticed how her eyes darted nervously toward the windows, and a knot of unease settled in my stomach. Last night, the dogs went wild, barking, rushing to the front door, their fur bristling with tension. When I cracked it open and peered outside, a chill ran through me. That evening, my niece sat on the living room floor, running her fingers through the colorful threads of a rug, playing quietly. Max and Ruby, my ever-loyal German shepherds, stayed right by her side, their sharp eyes tracking her every movement. No matter how many times I called them, they wouldn't budge. Their attentiveness was unusual, as if they sensed something. I couldn't. I studied my niece more closely. Her usual energy was absent, her face looked pale, her demeanor subdued. "You feeling okay, sweetie?" I asked gently, expecting her usual cheerful response. Instead, she gave a small nod and forced a weak smile before returning to her dolls. Something wasn't right. She was quieter than normal, her usual spark dimmed. What unnerved me more was the way her gaze kept flickering toward the windows, like she was waiting, expecting, to see something, or someone. Each time, after a fleeting glance, she would return to her dolls, her fingers moving stiffly, her silence heavy. She wasn't normally this jumpy. The dogs, still watching over her, huffed softly, their muscles tense. Ready. I thought about calling my sister, wondering if she had noticed anything off. Just as I reached for my phone, Max and Ruby suddenly snapped their heads toward the front door. Their postures stiffened, ears alert, bodies rigid with focus. I followed their gaze, my own breath catching. Something or someone was out there. The room thickened with tension as both dogs planted themselves by the door, tails motionless, a low growl rumbling from their chests. Their unwavering stares made my skin crawl. I had never seen them like this. Whatever had them on edge, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. I cast a glance at my niece, hoping she hadn't noticed, that she could just keep being a child, blissfully unaware. But the way the dogs stood guard said otherwise. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, a sharp knock at the door jolted me. I opened it to find our neighbor, Mrs. Kramer, standing there, her expression troubled. "Good morning," I greeted her, trying to read the worry in her eyes. She wasn't one for early visits. Whatever she had to say, it wasn't good. "Is everything all right with your niece?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I don't know yet," I admitted, Mrs. Kramer was sharp when it came to neighborhood happenings. If she was worried, I needed to be too. She went on to mention something that made my stomach twist. She had seen unfamiliar kids lingering near our yard lately. That set my thoughts racing. Who were they? Had they done something? Could they be connected to my niece's odd behavior, or the dog's unease? The possibility made my pulse quicken. I thanked Mrs. Kramer, closing the door behind her, my mind now buzzing with new worries. Max and Ruby still hadn't relaxed. Even with the door shut, they remained fixated on it, watching, waiting, and that's what unsettled me most. What did they know that I didn't? I decided we needed a little fun. "How about some ice cream?" I suggested to my niece with a bright smile. She looked up, nodding slightly. It was a chance to lift her spirits, and maybe get her to open up about whatever had been bothering her. I hoped the outing would help both of us feel better. As we walked to the ice cream shop, I saw her eyes brighten just a bit. The thought of a sweet treat seemed to bring her some comfort, but even when she smiled, I could tell something still weighed on her. I gently asked about her day, but her responses were short, guarded. Whatever it was, she wasn't ready to talk about it yet. After getting our ice cream, we headed to the nearby park. My niece ran ahead, weaving between the slides while I sat on a bench, keeping a close watch. The dogs settled beside me, their eyes constantly scanning the area. Everything seemed normal, but I was extra cautious now, alert to anything unusual. Then, Max and Ruby started sniffing the air, their movements more restless than before. I followed their gaze and spotted a group of older kids riding their bikes, circling near where my niece played. The dogs' tails didn't wag in friendly curiosity, just focused alertness. I found myself watching them closely, trying to determine if they posed any kind of threat. My heart skipped when I noticed my niece freeze in place. The group had stopped nearby, their eyes locked on her. Something about their stares sent an uneasy chill through me. I forced myself to remain seated, watching for any sign of trouble. My niece glanced quickly back at me before darting behind the swings, trying to disappear from their view. The kids didn't follow, but they exchanged smirks as if amused by her reaction. That bothered me. Max and Ruby stood, muscles tensed, ready to intervene. Their behavior was all the confirmation I needed. Something about those kids wasn't right. I stood up and walked toward my niece. "Hey there," I called softly. "How about we head home?" She nodded instantly, relief washing over her face. As we left the park, the dogs stuck close, their presence making me feel a little safer, but questions still lingered in my mind. With every step away from the park, my niece seemed to relax, her shoulders losing some of their tension. She even reached out to pat Max and Ruby, who led the way at a brisk pace. I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew something I didn't, something that made them so protective of her. Back home, I decided to try again. Sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of juice, I took a casual approach. "So, who were those kids at the park?" I asked gently, hoping she'd feel safe enough to talk. Her face darkened. She shrugged, eyes dropping to the floor. I could feel the weight of whatever she was holding in. It was something she wasn't ready to share yet, but I needed her to know I was there for her. I waited, giving her space, hoping she'd say more. Finally, she whispered, avoiding my gaze. "They say mean things sometimes." My heart clenched. Even in her small voice, the words carried so much hurt. This little confession gave me a glimpse into what was going on. But I knew there was more. More she hadn't said. More she might not even know how to express. I wanted to reassure her, to ease her mind, even just a little. Leaning forward, I said softly, "You know you're safe here, right? Max and Ruby won't let anything happen to you." Just as a faint smile touched her lips, the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, unexpected. Max and Ruby's heads snapped toward the door, their ears perked, bodies stiffening as they rushed to the entryway. I stood heart pounding, watching them closely. Max barked, his deep voice echoing through the house. Ruby let out a low, warning growl. Their protective stance made me hesitate before reaching for the handle. Slowly, I cracked the door open, half expecting to see something, or someone, unwelcome on the other side. To my relief, it was just a delivery driver, a package in hand. I thanked him quickly, closing the door with a sigh. But even as I set the package down, the tension in the room remained. Max and Ruby still lingered by the door, watching, waiting. The little incident only reinforced the unease hanging over our home. Even after I reassured myself that it was nothing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. The days after that felt strained. Every noise outside made Max and Ruby snap to attention. Every movement in the yard had them on high alert. My niece, I noticed, stayed close to them now, almost as if she felt safest when they were near. It comforted me to see how much they protected her, but at the same time, it only deepened my concern. I needed more answers. That evening, I called my sister to talk about what had been happening. She listened as I explained the dog's behavior, my niece's quietness, the strange kids at the park. To my surprise, she admitted that Max and Ruby had never acted this way before. This hyper-vigilant, this protective. We talked through possibilities. Maybe something in the neighborhood had changed, something the dogs sensed before we did. The idea unsettled me, but at the same time it reassured me. If something was wrong, at least we weren't blind to it. At least Max and Ruby were there. Later that night, during one of our quiet talks, my niece finally admitted, "They keep calling me names." Her voice was tiny, but the words hit hard. "Bullies. Hearing it out loud made my stomach twist. No child should have to endure that. I could only imagine what their cruel words were doing to her, how deeply they had settled into her heart. Looking at her, I knew I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't let her keep shrinking away, carrying the weight of their cruelty alone. Something had to be done, and soon. I decided it was time to step in and make sure my niece felt safe again. My sister agreed that talking to the other kids' parents was necessary after hearing what my niece had been going through. For now, we focused on making her feel supported at home. That evening we watched her favorite movie together, hoping to lift her spirits. The laughter helped a little, but I could tell she still needed more reassurance. Wanting to help her reconnect with other kids in a safe environment, we decided to host a small gathering at our house. The idea was to create a relaxed setting where the neighborhood kids could interact comfortably. My hope was that observing them together might reveal more about my niece's situation. If we could see the group dynamics firsthand, we'd have a better idea of how to address the issue. She was hesitant about joining, which was understandable given what she had been through, but with a little encouragement and the promise that Max and Ruby would be by her side, she agreed to participate. I assured her I'd be watching closely, ready to step in if needed. As the other children arrived, I noticed their curious yet distant glances. It wasn't very reassuring, but I stayed hopeful. True to their nature, Max and Ruby stayed close to my niece, their presence acting as an unspoken shield. As the backyard filled with laughter, I watched for signs of positive interaction, hoping to see her engage with the other kids. She managed a few shy conversations, small victories in my mind. But even as she spoke, there was a shadow of caution in her eyes. My sister and I remained nearby, within earshot, ready to intervene if things turned uncomfortable. Then I noticed something unsettling. Some of the kids cast glances in my niece's direction, whispering and giggling amongst themselves. Each time I saw her shrink a little, her playfulness fading like mist in the sun. It was heartbreaking. I exchanged a look with my sister. We both knew this couldn't continue. We needed to step in. Suddenly, I realized I had lost sight of my niece. Panic gripped me as I scanned the yard, hoping she had just moved into another conversation. But when I couldn't spot her, my stomach twisted with worry. Excusing myself from a conversation, I quickly moved through the crowd, searching for her. Then I heard Max and Ruby barking. Their alert stance directed my eyes toward the far side of the yard. Following their lead, I found my niece sitting alone, knees drawn to her chest. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by concern. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Not far away, a small group of kids stood watching. Their expressions were unreadable, but the tension in the air spoke volumes. I knelt beside her, speaking softly. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm here." Max and Ruby paced protectively around her, their quiet presence a comfort. I wanted her to feel safe again, to know she wasn't alone. Gently, I called her back inside. She hurriedly wiped her face as she stood, trying to hide the evidence of her pain. Max and Ruby stayed glued to her side, their eyes full of concern. Just then, Mrs. Kramer, our neighbor, approached. Her expression mirrored my own concern as she asked if everything was all right. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond, but her presence was reassuring. We spoke quietly about what we had noticed, and she mentioned that she too had seen some troubling behavior among the kids in the neighborhood. Hearing that solidified my determination. I had to get to the bottom of this. My niece deserved to feel safe, to feel happy again, and I was going to make sure she did. Even with Max and Ruby by her side, the worry never fully left her face. Her usual cheerfulness had been replaced by constant unease. Watching her struggle silently was unbearable. This couldn't go on, so I arranged a meeting with the families involved. We gathered in our living room, trying to keep the atmosphere calm and respectful. It wasn't easy to bring up such a difficult subject, but it needed to be done. My niece sat quietly, visibly anxious as we prepared to address the issue. Explaining what she had been going through wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The parents of the other kids looked shocked when they heard about the bullying. Their expressions mirrored my own when I first realized what was happening. It was a lot to take in, but I hoped they understood the importance of addressing it. When the kids involved joined the conversation, their initial reluctance slowly gave way to thoughtfulness. Under the weight of the adults' scrutiny, they began to realize the impact of their words and actions. This wasn't about placing blame. It was about guiding them to understand the harm they had caused. We all agreed on finding positive solutions to improve the situation. Seeing the adults and children work toward change brought a sense of hope. The weight that had settled over our home seemed to lift slightly. My niece seemed a bit brighter, and for the first time in a while, I saw a glimpse of her old self. Time passed. The tension began to fade. Max and Ruby still watched over her, but they seemed more at ease, sensing the shift. The older kids, with encouragement and understanding, started to change their behavior. They acted more kindly, more respectfully, and slowly the neighborhood began to feel peaceful again. It felt as if we had all turned over a new leaf together. Slowly but surely, we were becoming a community that looked out for one another. It was essential that everyone felt safe and welcome, and addressing the issue openly had brought us closer. We realized how important honest communication was, and the courage it took to speak up was deeply appreciated. Our collective efforts led to the positive change we had all hoped for. Seeing the kids getting along again, their laughter ringing through the neighborhood, was incredibly rewarding. It was comforting to know that taking action had made such a difference. Even Max and Ruby seemed to sense the newfound calm. Their ever-watchful eyes softened, and they finally began to relax around my niece. Their constant alertness faded, replaced by a quiet trust that she was safer now. They still stayed close, but it was clear they felt at ease. Watching them unwind was heartwarming. It reminded us just how strong their bond with her truly was. The past few weeks had taken a toll on all of us, but seeing my niece smile more with each passing day was the greatest relief of all. Her laughter, something I had dearly missed, filled our home once more. The entire neighborhood felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. One afternoon, Mrs. Kramer stopped by with a warm smile. "I've seen a big change in the kids," she said, her voice filled with encouragement. Her kind words reassured us that our efforts had made a real impact. We were grateful for her support in helping bridge understanding among our neighbors. Our little community was growing stronger, fostering kindness and respect. Although things had improved, a part of me knew it was wise to remain watchful. I spent more time at the window, keeping an eye on the kids as they played outside. It was important to ensure that they all felt welcome and free from fear. Life was returning to normal, but vigilance would ensure that their happiness endured. Then, one evening my niece beamed up at me. "Can my friends come over to play?" she asked eagerly. Encouraging her to invite friends over was an important step in rebuilding her confidence. Watching her interact with them, laughing freely and without hesitation, was a delight. It was clear she was finding joy again. Even Max and Ruby seemed to return to their playful selves, chasing after balls, lounging in the sun, and keeping a gentle but constant watch over her. Their joyful energy brought warmth back into our home. But their devotion never wavered. They still followed her sometimes, their protective instincts woven into the fabric of their love for her. One evening, as we sat together, my niece looked up at me with sincere eyes. "I'm glad they're with me," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. We all marveled at how pure and instinctive Max and Ruby's protection was. Through small but significant acts, they had made her feel safe when she needed it most. Their presence had been a source of comfort that no words could replace. It was then that I realized just how special they truly were. Their role in her life went beyond companionship. They had been her silent guardians, both physically and emotionally. Their love was unwavering, their protection absolute. They had sensed what we had failed to see at first, standing watch over her when she felt most alone. As a family, we never took their loyalty for granted. Each night we gathered around the dinner table, sharing laughter and little blessings from the day. We each took turns saying what made our day special, reminding ourselves of how fortunate we were to have one another. Then, after weeks of gentle reassurance, my niece finally opened up. Her small voice trembled as she admitted what she had kept. Hidden for so long, the neighbor's older kids had been bullying her. Her confession was both heartbreaking and revealing. It explained so much about the changes we had seen in her. The fear of making things worse had kept her silent. She had believed that speaking up might cause more problems, so she had endured it alone, hoping it would all just go away. But in those quiet moments of fear, Max and Ruby had stepped up. Without fail, they had sensed her distress. They had stood by her side when she felt powerless, their watchful presence offering comfort when she needed it most. Their instincts were uncanny. They had noticed what others had missed, picking up on the danger that lurked in whispered words and sideways glances. Every time they positioned themselves beside her, they weren't just keeping watch. They were telling her, in their own way, that she wasn't alone. As a family, we made a pact to surround her with love and reassurance, allowing her to heal at her own pace. The warmth of our community's support only strengthened our resolve. Each smile, each kind word, each small act of understanding helped her rebuild her confidence. With time, she blossomed. She began making new friends, slowly shaking off the fear that had once held her back. Each day brought a fresh opportunity to embrace the world around her, and Max and Ruby never strayed too far. Their presence remained a quiet source of comfort, a reminder that she was always protected. But now they too seemed more at ease. They still watched over her, but with a lightness that hadn't been there before, as if they too sensed that she was finally safe. Hand in hand, we worked on rebuilding trust, promising to be there for one another when it mattered most. Through every challenge, our family had grown stronger, learning that even the hardest trials could be overcome together. Peace had returned to our home, and with it, a sense of unity stronger than ever before. Max and Ruby had been more than just pets. They had been a pillar of strength in our journey. They never let us down, their unwavering devotion mirroring the love that bound us as a family. As my niece's resilience grew, so did our appreciation for the bonds we shared. Our story wasn't just about overcoming hardship. It was about love, about family, about the quiet heroes who stand beside us when we need them most. And in that we found something unbreakable.